Every day, there's thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities that are in an identifiable tool, and it's just not feasible to go look through them all. So CTEM really help security personnel and team focus on really what's exploitable today and what can really lead to a compromise of, my environment asset.
Gather around as we spill the real tea on cybersecurity minus all the confusing jargon. I'm your host, Jara Rowe, and this podcast is where we cut through the confusion and get the truth about security and compliance. This is a podcast from Trava Security. So lately, there's been a lot of talk about one and done cybersecurity and compliance. But one thing I know for sure is that threats change too quickly to really have that mindset. So on this episode, we're going to dive into CTEM and how it's an ongoing approach that identifies and manages exposures continuously. And I have one of my coworkers on here to help us talk about that. Hey, An.
Hey, Jara. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So just in case this is someone's first time listening to you on the podcast, please introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Anh Pham. I'm currently the Director of Penetration Testing and Security here at Trava. I've been in the industry for about 12 years coming up now, mostly in security engineering and operation. I've been at Trava for the last 4 years, helping to mature our security and GRC program and now leading up pen test practice.
All right, fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into it. So I mentioned it already, but we really don't know what it means. So what is CTEM in plain language?
Sure. So CTEM stands for Continuous Threat Exposure Management. It's basically is a structure and ongoing approach or framework to finding and fixing security exposure that actually matter to an organization, environment, and asset. The two key words here is continuous and exposure. So that really is what separates CTEM now from traditional framework. It's ongoing. It needs to be practiced all the time, and it is focused on weaknesses that actually matter.
Weaknesses that matter. That's important. So CTEM stands for Continuous Threat Exposure Management.
Yes.
All right. So how is CTEM different from traditional point-in-time testing?
I mean, you just pretty much described the major difference, right? So traditional point-in-time testing is pretty much like a snapshot. It's done once a year. It's very static in nature. It's very report heavy, meaning, finding get dressed up and then included in a one-time report, get delivered, and then nothing is being done to follow up on those findings, right? CTEM sort of shift the mindset a little from that static approach to, approaching security more proactively. So instead of doing a test once a year or once a quarter, you now have a repeatable process that you create to make sure that it matches the way your environment change, right? And the speed that your environment is changing at. So if your environment changes a lot, you're not testing a lot. If your environment changes slower, you're not testing slower. But the point is to continuously validating your exposure and weaknesses to make sure that you don't leave anything open for the attacker to exploit.
Okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. So what are some examples of point-in-time testing, just so people are familiar with what we're talking about?
Sure. I think the biggest example or the most commonly seen example is, a single annual penetration test. So a lot of companies are familiar with that. It's a planner exercise that happens once a year, involve multiple teams, right? That is coordinated. Another example is maybe an annual audit of an environment, like an assessment or that kind of thing. So very point-in-time and static. And then occasional vulnerability scan that get run in the environment.
So what are the main components of a CTEM approach?
So there are 5 main components of CTEM. And again, they are a repeatable cycle. So the first one is scoping. Prior to doing anything within a CTEM framework, you need to understand your asset, your attack surface, and your crowd tools. What are your intellectual property? What are the things that you need to protect? What do you have in your environment that need to be protected? And then the second component is discovery. in this component, in this phase, you focus on identify vulnerability and weaknesses across all of those asset and attack surface, right? So now that you know what you have in your environment, you need to go and hunt and find vulnerability on those things that you have in your environment. The third component on the third phase is prioritization. In this phase, you basically take the result of the second phase and the first phase together, and then you combine them. So, from the first phase, you have an overview of your environment, of your asset, what are the critical asset, what are non-critical, all of that. And then in the second phase, you have a list of weaknesses and vulnerability. Now, in this third phase, you combine them together to really narrow down to a list of exposure that affect your most critical asset and also can lead to real penetration into your environment, right? So once you have that, then you move on to the fourth component, which is validation. This is fairly straightforward now that you have a list of, narrowed down exposure that you want to focus on. In this phase, do you actually perform testing on them to validate that those your theory or your assessment is valid? That exposure can lead to counterlies. And then fifth phase is really the final part, the final component of CTEM is mobilization. So in this phase, take everything that was identified as real exposure or exposure that matter, that had been validated, can actually be exposed and exploited, and fix them, right? So now that you have all of those, you focus on fixing them. And then the entire cycle repeat again.
All right. That sounds like a lot of important things for sure. So I feel like I already have heard some of the reasons why to the question I'm about to ask you next, but why are companies moving toward CTEM? What pressures and risks are really driving organizations to adopt this approach?
Sure. So there are a few big drivers that really drive the creation of this framework and then also driving a lot of company in terms of adopting this kind of framework. So the first one is really threat actors are evolving even faster than before because of the explosion of AI. We already see practice of malicious actors using AI to increase the speed and complexity of their attack. Static point in time sort of testing and security just doesn't work anymore. Attack surfaces are exploding. Not only that we have remote work environment now, I think we're moving into global workforce now. So a lot of companies are employing, from abroad, outside the country, in multiple countries, multiple continents, using a multitude of SaaS apps mostly. They don't build into a static one location data center anymore. So now your attack surface is just big and wide, and you need to continuously make sure that your attack surface is protected. I think we're also seeing more and more leadership wanting to focus on actor security instead of a pretty dashboard with some number. And maybe it's the pressure is coming from regulation and compliance and maybe not pure security. But either way, we're seeing that more people are taking security more seriously. Leadership are wanting more accurate reporting of security posture. And then the last one that I think is driving CTEM is that security teams are already stretched pretty thin, right? In most organizations, every day there's thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities that are in an identifiable tool, and it's just not feasible to go look through them all. So CTEM really help security personnel and team focus on really what's exploitable today and what can really lead to a compromise of my environmental asset.
Yeah, for sure. So let me see if I can recap some of these. So some of the pressures include AI helping the bad guys, the fact that we are more global, our attack surface is larger, and the teams are just stretched thin with all of the regulation changes and things like that. So we are seeing more companies move into continuous approaches now.
Correct.
All right. So how should a business know if they're ready to adopt CTEM?
For most business, they probably should start thinking about adopting CTEM after they have established a foundation for their security program, right? So they have started implementing control into the environment. They have started running some basic vulnerability scan or have conducted penetration tests for the first time, and they have started fixing results. That's probably the best to start thinking about adopting and start incorporating CTEM phases into their security framework. Even if they don't start with all 5 phases, it's still better to start adopting some of those phases and start doing it more continuously.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, on. So we've talked about CTEM. I feel like I have a better understanding, but I'm going to recap this a little bit before I let you go. Okay. All right. So CTEM again stands for Continuous Threat Exposure Management. It is an approach that companies are starting to move more into as we move away from like one and done and point in time testing as our environments change and grow because we're working on our software or the cloud or something. Is that correct?
That is correct. Perfect summarization.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So, listeners, An and I are actually going to continue this conversation. We're going to dive a little bit more into how CTEM is put into action. So, if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe so you can catch part 2. Thanks for your time, An.
Thanks for having me.
And that's the tea on cybersecurity. If you like what you listen to, please leave a review. If you need anything else from me, head on over to Trava Security. Follow wherever you get your podcasts.